Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of ShellBlack Whiteboard, where we help you get the most out of the Salesforce platform. I'm ShellBlack, president and founder of ShellBlack.com and Salesforce MVP, and we're going to continue our conversation around custom objects, and we're going to talk about custom objects set in a master detail relationship. So let's take a look. So to set the stage, I've got two custom objects. I've got one custom object called an expense report. So it's going to have fields like who submitted the expense report, where did you travel to, the date of travel, purpose of the trip, and so on. And then I'm going to have another custom object for my expense report entries. And so these are going to be my receipts from the trip. So my airfare receipt, my rental car receipt, my meals, and so on. What's unique in how I'm going to tie these two custom objects together is I'm going to put them in a master detail relationship because I want to roll up my totals of all my receipts up to the parent and use roll-up summary fields. So let's talk about how we do that. So if you're creating a new field on a custom object, you can do a lookup relationship or you can do a master detail relationship. And a master detail relationship is a little unique, and to me, when I'm deciding on which one to use, the big criteria is, do I want to roll up anything to the parent in this child-parent relationship? If so, I'm probably going to want a master detail relationship. There's some other things you need to know. I'll talk about that in a second. So on my expense entries custom object, I have a pick list called category, which is allowing me to segment my entries into airfare, rental car, hotels, meals, etc. Once I have this master detail relationship established, I now have a new field type called a roll-up summary field. So what I'm going to do is put fields to summarize my airfare, meals, etc. Using roll-up summary fields and tabulate information from my child records. When I create a roll-up summary field, I have a couple of options that I can pick from. There's a count, which is counting the number of records in the child relationship. So in this case, I have 5. So if I did that type of roll-up summary on my parent, I would count 5. I'm using or you can use a sum, and then sum is what I'm using in this example. So it's summarizing the amount of each receipt of my expense report up to the parent. You can also have a minimum and maximum. So I've got a blue asterisk here just to let you know what you can summarize. You can summarize a number, a currency, which is the example I'm using here, or a percent. Minimum and maximum has a couple more options. So a number, a currency field, a percent, or a date or date time. So let's say that I wanted to know the last entry, the maximum date, I could do that. Or if I wanted to get the maximum amount, maybe I wanted the most expensive entry, I could use a maximum summary field. So when I'm adding these summary fields to my expense report objects, I have filters available. So just like you're creating a view, you can pick a field on the child object. I'm going to pick the category pick list, and I'm going to write a filter that says category equals airfare. And that's going to be the filter I'm going to use on this roll-up summary field. So I'm only summarizing fields that make that specific criteria. So I'm not summarizing all, I'm only summarizing where the category equals airfare. So you notice on this one, meals at $35 is actually calculating and summarize these two entries. So I would have created a filter that says summarize, do a summary calculation where the category equals meal, and then summarize that amount. So that's why that's $35. Super, super helpful when you want to roll information up to a parent without using a trigger or a scheduled job or code. So a couple things. Because a roll-up summary is really a formula that's calculating, when you're in edit mode on the parent, those fields are not going to be available. And then you have a limit of 10 summary fields on that object. I have an asterisk here on that limit because you can open a case with Salesforce and have that bumped, I believe, to 20. All right, let's get to this side of the board and call out a couple things to know. So when you're setting security on an object that's in a master detail relationship, you set the security at the parent. So let's take our expense report custom object. If I have the expense report parent in private, that puts all the associated child records in private as well. So if I can't see the expense report, I won't be able to see the expense report entries. You set the OWD, your organizational-wide default, to the parent, and that cascades to the child. Salesforce does recommend that you only have 10,000 or less child objects in a master detail relationship. I assume that's for performance and calculations. If you delete a child record, the master record still stays. So if I delete an expense report entry, I'm not going to delete the parent or the expense report. However, if you do the reverse and you delete the parent, the expense report for the Chicago trip, all the child records, all the expense report entries will be deleted. You can always undelete it out of the recycle bin, and all that will come back to life in a relationship again. But just realize if you delete the parent, you can delete the child records as well. When you create your master detail relationship, there's a checkbox on when you're creating that master detail lookup relationship to allow reparenting. If allow reparenting is checked, I can move, in my example, an expense report entry to another expense report. So let's say I have two expense reports. I have a Dallas trip and a Chicago trip. If that checkbox is checked, I'm going to be able to take that entry for, say, airfare and move it from Dallas and put it up against the Chicago trip. If that's not checked when you set up that relationship, I will have to delete the airfare for Dallas and create a net new record for Chicago. So let's talk about what could be on the master side of the master detail relationship. A master can be a standard object or a custom object. You can also have on an object up to two master detail relationships. So a child object can actually have two parents in a master detail relationship. Record ownership is determined at the parent level, at the master level. So if we think about our expense report that we're just talking about, you will see a record owner field at the expense report level, but you're not going to see a record owner field at the entry object level. Salesforce assumes that in that tight master detail relationship, you really just have ownership at one level. All right, so there's kind of a gotcha here because I just told you earlier that you could have up to two master detail relationships in an object. So what happens on record ownership and who's the record owner and when you have two parents? So the first object that you throw in a master detail relationship becomes the primary. So when you do things like workflow and you have a workflow rule that is assigning a task to the record owner, that workflow rule is going to look for the first object you threw in that master detail relationship or the primary object, and that's the record owner that's going to get the task. Kind of an obscure use case, but that's a gotcha that'll get you now and then. All right, that wraps up our episode on custom objects in a master detail relationship. I hope you liked that one. If you have any feedback on how we're doing, you can hit me a couple different ways. I'm out on Twitter, Shell_Black, or you can email me at whiteboard@ShellBlack.com. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I hope you watch a future episode.